Welcome to the cast of the Terror Infamy. My first question, because I was so horrified by the opening sequence in a good way, is could you all describe what you think the monster is in the Terror?
Well, there's so many terrors going on at the same time. In the first season, you had the actual monster, and you had the breakdown between the men. In our season, we have an actual monster, but we also have lies and deception going on between family members. We have a government imprisoning its own citizens. So there's so many things going on at the same time. So many monsters.
Can you guys tell me about how you made and where you discovered that and what you think about that bone cracking sound?
The bone cracking sound started as a pure piece of improvisation by Kiki. Do you remember that? Do you know that?
I remember that.
Okay, because we shot a scene,
yeah,
and we said we just need to get a reaction out of that. Mm. And Kiki did something which we thought, if we did a big bone cracking sound with it, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? And then we thought, let's do it again and again and again. So it became a thing, but it came out of an ad lib.
That's fascinating. It's so scary.
It was great.
Yeah.
There's more than one throughout the season.
One of the things that struck me, there's a line in the second episode. A picture captures the photographer's relationship to the world around him. And I'm wondering if you all could talk about what the Terror Infamy captures about the world around us.
Well, at the core of it is human nature, our tendency under great stress to react hysterically and with irrationality and, in many cases, racism. When Pearl Harbor happened, we happened to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor, despite the fact that we were American citizens. And the real monster is how America got stampeded by that terror of bombing. And that terror went all the way up to the presidency of the United States, where the president got stampeded as well. And all the political leadership got stampeded. The whole nation was against us. People like Earl Warren, who later went on to become a distinguished liberal Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who happened to be the Attorney General of California. And he was ambitious. He wanted to get elected governor of California. And he saw that the single most popular issue was the lock up the Japs issue. And his ambition, and that was his fault, the human failing. He got in front of that issue despite the fact that he knew better. He was a top lawyer who knew the Constitution of the United States, and yet he used it to get elected governor of California and eventually be appointed the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So not only the president, but people who are educated and steeped and professional legal people get stampeded because of the evil of ambition in this case. In Roosevelt's case, the evil of fallibility and a nation that was made hysterical. And out of that, the tension and the anguish and the rage and the terror comes the ancient beliefs in spirits and ghosts. So the core terror, the monster, is in ourselves, the human animal.
That's a good segue into my next question, which is about the bakemono and the sort of the spirit life that's referred to. There's also sort of an element of Catholicism too. A lot of these things are referred to by the younger characters in the show as old country ways. Do you feel as though by having maybe lost touch with some of those things, we've lost something and what we could regain by bringing them back?
We addressed that, and it was very real when these events actually occurred, the generational conflict. You know, you had the first generation who had come here, like my great-grandfather. Then you had, you know, the second generation that was more Americanized. And they were, because they were Americans. They played baseball. And my character, Chester, that's another, you know, conflict that's going on in his storyline is my father wants to stay in this insular community, and Chester wants to see the country and be more American. You know, he has a beautiful Mexican girlfriend, so he's not trying to be confined by tradition. But what I love about this story is that Chester has to discover who he really is, and by going back and discovering who he is, that helps him kind of reconnect with his culture, and his culture helps him to defeat, or maybe not, the terror that's terrorizing his community.
Yeah, and I think our culture is what makes you be who you are, you know? So even though when you want to put it behind you, it's always there. It's always right there with you. It's always accompanying you. So I think in the terror in particular, like my character being Mexican, in that time, Latinos were marginalized so much that they needed to get away from that culture because they didn't want to be Mexican anymore. They wanted to be American. So for them to go back and to be proud of who you are and who you came from, you know? So I think it's vital for society to stay true to who you are, to stay true to your culture and to your beliefs. And I think in that era, it was the Americans were all about making you American, you know, and it was about forgetting who you are. And I think we have a good time right now about like, let's just be proud of who we are and let's embrace it.
In terms of sort of that question, one of the things so the first episode is titled after this sort of proverb that goes in the episode: the moment you believe you are safe, the swallows will peck you to death. What do you think the warning is for the present in that proverb?
Well, since I wrote it, it's something I made up. It's I think one of the sort of really sort of poignant tragedies of any immigrant experience is that the immigrant generation makes a certain sacrifice in pursuit of this American dream. They themselves will never be fully assimilated into the culture. They recognize that to a certain extent. And their children are going to, by the nature of living in America, in the context of America, lose some part, small or large, of the culture of their parents' home country, and perhaps more and more and more as the generations go on. So there's a sacrifice that's made, and frequently the younger generation feels like they need to kill, metaphorically, the older generation and separate themselves as much as possible. And that's what Chester does very much in the early part of our series, is he believes himself to be fully American, and all that old Japanese stuff is hoo-ha from his parents' generation and his grandparents' generation, and he feels wholly American. But the thing that Yuko tells him is the moment you feel completely safe, this nest that you've built for yourself is going to turn on you, which Chester doesn't realize until it happens.
I didn't realize that, you know, trying to kill Yuko, a very traditional Japanese, you know, entity, it also works on that level of, you know, having to discard your roots, your heritage during this time period. Because a lot of Japanese Americans did. I mean, you know, a lot of Japanese Americans don't speak Japanese. And I think it's because of this very specific time period where we were portrayed as the enemy. And, you know, it's on record, right, George? Families were telling each other, don't speak Japanese, hide the samurai sword, hide any relics that tie us back to Japan. Otherwise, they'll consider us the enemy and put us in prison. But they ended up doing that anyway.
And even this American experience that Japanese Americans had of being imprisoned unjustly and being stripped of all your earthly properties and degraded and disgraced, this is an important part of their own family history. But younger Japanese Americans, and from my vantage point, I consider people under 65 youngsters. They, when we did Allegiance about the internment story, they came backstage to tell me how moved they were, and so and then they tell me that their parents or their grandparents were in camp. This is their American heritage, and yet when I asked them, "Oh, which camp were they in?" they have no idea, and I thought I'd help them out by their recalling where their parents may have been. Was it in Wyoming? Was it in Arizona? Was it in Arkansas? They don't know that. So a horrific experience like this, even if it's an American experience, people blot out because of the pain, and the parents didn't want to inflict their pain and disgrace onto their children. It's vitally important for them as Americans to know this American history, not necessarily their ancient Japanese history. And yet circumstances can be so horrific, so terrifying, that they don't know their American heritage.
Thank you all for coming in. Enjoy your Comic-Con.
Thank you so much.